guys, it's Georgia with the Fempower Health podcast. 1/3 of cases of infertility is female factor, 1/3 is male factor, and then 1/3 of it is unknown. However, as the next guest on the Fempower Health podcast very smartly puts it, all the workup is done on the women before the men are even tested. And he is trying to change that with his new Dadi kit. So take a listen to all the factors that men need to take into account when they're trying to better understand their fertility and why it's so important to be proactive.
When I turned 30, that I started really evaluating, the medical space, and the kind of genesis for the Dadi idea and the company actually happened years before, when a friend of mine was very suddenly diagnosed with cancer. And I kind of learned about the male fertility journey through that lens. And then when I turned 30, I went and got a physical, and really through that experience, the doctor never asked me about my reproductive health. And it was through that lens, along with my good friend, that started thinking about the concept of Dadi and ultimately planning to build the service. So although I don't come from a medical background, I think the kind of technological and operational background for myself and members of the team, really helped to spawn this new generation of service.
So before we dive into that meeting that you had with your doctor plus your friend's experience, let's talk about what Dadi Kit is and the purpose that it serves in the market. And then we can dive into kind of helping people understand where the challenges are and how Dadi Kit can help. So maybe you can just summarize that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dadi is a male fertility company. We focus on sperm testing and storage. We have our Dadi Kit, which is an at-home sperm collection kit. So it gets delivered to a member or customer's home. They collect in the comfort and security and now safety of their home, hand their kit to FedEx. Within 24 hours, they receive a complete fertility report. We give all of our customers a year of free storage. And then if they decide they want to continue to store, it's an annual storage fee of $99. Our total kit, which is the kit and the fertility report and the year of storage, is $199. And this is basically an order of magnitude more affordable than the existing industry. So if you were to go into a physical sperm bank and collect, get tested, and then store for a year, that'll cost you in the territory of around $1,500. So really what Dadi's trying to do is not only modernize male fertility testing and storage by focusing on the at-home or the sheltered-in-place collection experience, but we're also trying to make it much more accessible, and that comes through price and awareness, and those are two big focuses that we have today.
And what I really like about how the industry is shifting when it comes to fertility, male or female, is there's so many people who've had experiences similar to yours. Like, for example, Fempower Health originated because of my very, very long fertility journey to have a child. And I was later in my journey, I think I was like 36 when I was starting. And, there's a lot of gaps in knowledge and awareness and process and cost. I mean, you name it, there are the gaps. And it's the consumers who are going through the experiences who are creating the transformation. So in talking about that, tell us, like, why does it matter outside of the obvious of fertility? Like, why should a man need to store his sperm and use something like a Dadi Kit? Because there's a lot of consumer at-home testing as well, which we'll dive into later. But tell us, like, why this is important.
Yeah, so I think, in the simplest terms, there's kind of two primary reasons. I think on a macro level, what we're seeing is that male fertility levels over the last 40 years have consistently been declining. When you look at the literature and the research on the subject, they aren't able to point to any single factor, but ultimately it's lifestyle, it's environmental, it's a number of things that are leading to this occurrence. And the kind of data point that they publicly tout is, over the last 40 years, if you look at on a generational level, my father was 50% more fertile than I am today. And what that means is he had 50% more sperm than a typical individual of my generation, for example. So inherently, male fertility counts continue to go down. And what this is leading to is kind of a compounding nature. So along with kind of fertility continuing to decrease, couples are waiting longer and longer to have children. That's classically referred to as kind of economic infertility, which is the primary reason that couples wait, is they want to make sure that they're in a financially stable position before having children. And that bar is continually being raised. So what we're seeing today is that 1 in 7 couples can't get pregnant through natural means. And what that means is after a year of trying to get pregnant, they're unable. When those proactive couples go into a fertility center, for example, and get tested, what you actually quickly discover is that 33% of the root cause of that infertility between the couple was female factor, 33% of that root cause of the infertility was male factor, and 33% unknown. So of known cases of infertility between a couple, 50% could be attributed to the man. And what's so interesting about this, and it's something that we even didn't fully understand when we first started building out the service, is when you look at society in general and you ask people about the subject of infertility, especially is it a female-related issue, almost exclusively people believe it's a female-related issue, when in reality it's not. And a big part of what we're trying to do at Dadi is through education and awareness, we're trying to normalize this and help couples understand and society in general understand that really fertility takes two, and infertility is plagued by both. And we hope to kind of readjust the kind of all the misplaced pressure that's been put on women and reallocate it to the male side as well.
And it's great to see that you're doing this, because what's also been happening, I've noticed, because now it's been about 10 years since my own journey began, is the amount of awareness that is being created. Because I was in a unique situation where I happened to go to my OBGYN and just had my annual exam, and she asked me some questions. I never worried about fertility struggles, so I didn't have any complaints or concerns because my family's extremely fertile. And she just took some tests. I didn't know you could even do these sorts of tests. She calls me up the next day and says, go to a fertility doctor. I hadn't even started trying. Wow. And so right away, my husband was tested because we were at a fertility clinic. Mm-hmm. So that's another question I'd like to discuss in this process so that people are aware. So just so people have the background, the definition of infertility, you alluded to part of it, is if you're over 35 and you've been trying for 6 months or more, that's a definition. And then if you are under 35 and have been trying for a year or more, that's when you typically go and to see a doctor. And at some point they may recommend a reproductive endocrinologist. And in that process, I have found, at least, and I haven't done a deep analysis, and maybe you can talk about this more, is that it's usually once you go to the reproductive endocrinologist where the men get tested. But you up front, you have couples who may not know that that's the information. A lot of them are scared to see a doctor. Some of them only go to an OBGYN. The men are not going to their doctor, it's the women. And if the OBGYN doesn't say, go to a reproductive endocrinologist or your spouse should get tested, there's a huge gap. So tell us a little bit more about what you've seen, since you deal with this specifically so much more than I would. Tell us, like maybe validate and add some color to that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, women in family planning matters typically take the front seat. And I think if you look in general, men have a tendency to exist in this kind of ignorance is bliss type of environment, especially when it comes to medical. And what this leads to is when there is an issue between a couple, really the female factor almost gets discovered in its entirety before the male factor is even examined at all. And when you think about the process by which Dadi has created, I mean, masturbating at home and pointing into a cup and putting it in the mail and then getting a report back 24 hours later is significantly easier. Now in today's context, safer, more affordable, and frankly, less stressful than anything on the female side. And a big part of what we're trying to promote, because we are seeing this trend exactly, is this idea of evaluating male factor first. Just because it is so much easier and so much more cost effective, and given it's important in this infertility calculation, it really should be discovered first. And that is a big trend that we're trying to ultimately promote.
In talking to medical experts, one of the things that has become a question is, how does the consumer decide what they do at home, which thing to choose to do at home, and then when to go to a doctor? And part of why I wanted to bring you on is I really like all the different things that Dadi, the Dadi kit specifically tests for. So maybe you can talk about what it is that the Dadi kit tests for when it comes to male fertility, what it doesn't test for, and how that consumer picks between your at-home test versus a competitor who may not test for all the same things. And then and just that whole process of then, okay, now I need to go to a doctor. So can you maybe walk through that journey so people understand?
Yeah, so I think it's really important off the bat to note that we don't do any at-home testing. It's strictly just at-home collection.
True, true.
And what happens is we actually mail the deposit back. So a bit of background is the actual Dadi kit itself is a pretty unique piece of technology. So we patented it heavily. And what it ultimately does is inside of the box, it creates a thermal environment that's conducive to keeping the sperm alive for the journey back to the lab. When it arrives at our lab, we conduct complete fertility testing. So that's all of the kind of, typical and normal KPIs of male fertility, which is sperm count and motility and volume and pre-freeze motile sperm. But we also do advanced testing, which is morphology. Now, morphology is interesting because it is actually classified as a diagnostic. And when you have a diagnostic, the at-home requirements for completing that service are different depending on your state. So certain states allow for direct access testing, meaning a customer or a member can order it directly and we can fulfill. In other cases, we actually need a physician to approve that order. And again, in our pursuit of trying to make this service normalized and more accessible and easier to understand, we built a complete digital process for that. So in the event that you're located in a non-DAT state, we actually have a physician that's powered by Fertility, who's one of our trusted partners, who actually reviews that request, approves it. When the report comes in, that physician will then again review the entire report. And then we actually link each individual customer up with a registered nurse who can then perform a detailed diagnostic review and then talk about next steps if that's something that's of interest. So we've really tried to port the in-lab experience and lose no level of medical standard, lose no medical level of service, but port it all with the ability to do it at home. And that's a key differentiator. There are services that allow you to test your sperm at home. It typically involves a pretty cumbersome and awkward process of handling your semen and running it through a number of different contraptions. And ultimately, we felt from the very start of this that we wanted to operate at the highest medical standard. We'll train lab techs using the latest technology to actually complete the fertility report versus, a less conclusive approach of doing it at home.
And kudos to you. So I think you may know that I'm from the biopharmaceutical industry. I've been in it my entire career, and then had my own journey. And I do a lot in the consumer journey space. And I give you kudos because that is something I did not know. Is that a recent evolution for Dadi Kit, where you have the connection to the to Fertility to be able to look at the morphology? Is that more recent? Because I don't recall seeing that.
Yeah, so we for us, we really try to start with simplicity, and then we add capabilities. So for us, we got to the stage where we felt confident with our operational processes and what we were doing on the basic fertility testing side, and it was time for us to expand our services. So in June, we launched our next generation kit, which is the one that's shown on the website currently. And in connection with that, we launched the morphology and nurse diagnostic service as well. So yeah, it was a kind of a 4-month development since we launched it.
Got it. Okay. You have, for all of my startup friends who are listening, you've done your MVP very well. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the exact approach. I mean, for us, what's so interesting is, again, we come from kind of a technical background, and in our arena, kind of a pace of innovation is really the key differentiator between different companies and groups. When we looked at the subject in the industry of fertility, it's pretty much been stagnant for 40 years. There's been almost no development when it comes to the way that customers are ultimately serviced, and there's been no change in the underlying business model. And we just saw an opportunity to bring the tenets that exists in a lot of kind of leading product and service companies and bringing it to this space. So virtually almost a year from when we launched our first kit, we had our second generation kit in the market. And that contained a whole number of product improvements and security improvements that were just focused on trying to create the best customer experience. And we're not stopping. For us, we're looking ahead, and we see many opportunities in the fertility stack, is what we call it, where we can bring the same thoughtfulness, the same technical capabilities to improve the overall level of service.
Now, what happens once they send in their sample and the test has been done and the results come back? Like, what is the next action? So, and I know one is freeze, wait till later, but what if they're in the middle of undergoing fertility treatments? Like, I'm assuming there's some sort of results they get back and recommendations that you give. So how does that happen? And then are there gaps the consumer should be aware of on things they need to do regardless of the results that come in from Dadi?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's always worth disclosing and outlining is a single collection doesn't always directly indicate or give a signal to the overall level of fertility, because there's a number of factors that go in to that collection. So we actually do have a number of different members and customers who actually perform a test and then they'd like to do it again and maybe do it again in another 6 months. So the timeline here is quite important. But fundamentally, for us, and this is an area that we want to continue to develop in, when someone gets the report back, we outline in a kind of customer-focused, easy to digestible way what their overall results were. And then we compare those results against the World Health Organization 5th edition, which is kind of the standard bearer of male fertility percentiles. Now, one of the things that at Dadi we're trying to actively think about and work on is there a better way of displaying that information? So one thing that's worth calling out is if you look at the World Health Organization's 5th edition, the percentiles and the ranges that they've ultimately outlined are pretty misaligned with the data that actually exists in the industry. And if you talk to a number of doctors, there's mixed opinions on the WHO. So we feel that there is a huge opportunity, again, on the kind of data and product side, to bring a little bit more information to the space and ultimately provide more context to customers around the fertility report. That's what we hope to do. Today, we do present the information. We try to give a relative range. We have capabilities internally to then help support. So we have medical professionals on our side to help guide people through a number of questions. And then we also offer that Win Fertility nurse service that allows people to actually get a detailed diagnostic and then be clearly pointed in the direction of how to take next steps in the case that they want to do that. But to your earlier point, we think that there's a long way to go in ways that we can make this service more normalized and make the information more understandable for customers and members.
Are the doctors that are out there perceiving results from the Dadi kit, and what challenges might the consumer face? And I'll give you an example of why I have to ask this question. When I started, only 10 years ago, I had to paper chart my basal body temperature. And now 10 years later, there's like over 100 apps where you can track it. Right. And I remember going into a doctor's office and I was so proud. I had my charts, so you can have my data and like what's going on with my fertility. And I bring it in my paper and he's like, I don't need to see that. I can tell you what you need to do. And because I'm so familiar with the medical profession, I left and went to another doctor. Some may not feel so comfortable doing that. So what should the consumer be aware of that they may be facing with potential resistance for having such what I think is helpful information, because it's a whole lot better than a lot of nothing. So what are some of the things that they should be aware of?
Yeah, but I think in the medical space in general, there are, I would say, like different classifications for physicians and their comfort for change. I think one of the things that we've been trying to be very thoughtful about is, what is the physician experience when reviewing the report? So actually, when we generate the fertility report for members, if you scroll down to the very bottom, there's the ability to see a physician's report. And what we've actually done is we've taken the same information that's outlined in the customer report and we put it in the exact format that most doctors are actually comfortable looking at the data. And then we provide as much context and information there as possible. And the reaction so far has been quite positive. There are individuals that do, question still question the importance of male factor infertility. So that's
Really?
the one. Oh yeah, absolutely. There are those who still believe that male factor infertility really isn't an area that warrants this much attention. We have different
Okay.
opinions,
Good,
obviously,
good to know that. Okay. Consumer, I hope
but
you're listening.
but we also have, you know, a number of individuals in the medical field that have been unbelievably supportive. So, you know, a really great example that we referenced is actually during COVID, with everything shutting down. What ultimately ended up happening is a number of, if not most, fertility centers ended up shutting down.
Yep.
And we actually had a number of medical institutions, John Hopkins actually being one of them, that reached out and said, hey, are you able to support our oncology group, for example, during this period? Because our cryo lab is shut down. And ultimately, you know, cancer doesn't stop with COVID.
Yep.
And, you know, individuals before they begin chemo are recommended to preserve their sperm and their ability to procreate. So I think it's been, you know, it's been interesting. We certainly get some pushback from certain medical professionals, but I think overall there's actually been a fairly warm welcome, strictly because we haven't done anything different on the medical side. Again, we try to follow absolute best practices that already exist in labs today. All that we've really tried to focus on is the customer experience, the collection experience, and then ways of communicating that data that's a little bit more approachable.
Got it. So then back to the consumer journey. So women are in somewhat of a more fortunate position in the sense that, you know, if we are good about getting our annual exam, we have an OBGYN that we go to. And it was interesting when I was at the ASRM conference last year, one of the clinicians, who by the way was a man, he said, you know, based on what we know, men tend to go to a doctor when their mother, sister, daughter, wife tells them to go. So men don't have like a place outside of a primary care doctor. So if I'm proactive about my health and I order this Dadi kit and I get these results and I want to do something outside of just freezing my sperm for one day, maybe when I want to have a child, and I'm doing it because I just want to be proactive and test, I get these results. Do I hand them to my spouse and say, can you take this to your OBGYN? Do I say we should probably go see a reproductive endocrinologist? Do they take it to their PCP or urologist? What's the next step based on what you've seen? Because I'm sure you've pathed out the consumer journey. So what does the man do? Because he doesn't really have a home for this, right?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point. So all of the examples that you gave happen.
Okay.
And we would ultimately recommend that based off of each individual case. I think the thing that's really important to recognize is, and this shocked us. This was not part of the overall plan when we launched. But our youngest customers today are 17, or sorry, not 17, are in their teens, and our oldest customers are in their 70s.
What?
Yeah, so the spectrum is massive. And what that leads to are, you know, countless differentiated versions of life stage. So, you know, when we talk about what to do next, it really depends on each individual use case. But again, you know, we've tried to make it as easy as possible to download this information and print out this information, to take it to different sources. And then as we've been adding capabilities to our own service, we have more and more opportunities to call up and speak to a nurse and understand what's next. So we are trying to bridge that gap between, you know, men not knowing what to do next and really never being proactive, and trying to make it as simple as possible for them to get those answers.
And some of the gaps you're seeing and the hopes that you do have, what would be that message today that you would want men to take away from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we're a very long-term focused company. So, you know, to your point, we think that we're at the very start of this growing space. You know, if I was to kind of put my future forward hat on and try to imagine a scenario that would kind of honor the importance of something like male factor infertility. So I would say, like, you know, people today get braces to ensure that they can have straight teeth. The reality that we'd love to get to is, you know, for those men who are trying to be proactive about their health, and they go and they get a physical, for the subject of fertility or infertility to be discussed really during those sessions. And, you know, we really believe that all men, you know, when they get to the ages of kind of their early 20s, should really just take the step forward and get themselves tested, just determine what their optionality is in the future. again, I don't want to, we try to resist fear-based approaches and trying to talk about a lot of this. It's hard to separate that sometimes, but 1 in 10 men are naturally infertile, for example. And what that means is their ejaculate could look completely normal, and we get deposits that arrive at our lab every single day that look normal. But when you go under a microscope and you look there's actually no sperm. And it's a spectrum, right? So, these 10%, there could be cases where certain IVF procedures would allow them to procreate in the future. But I think the important point is understanding your optionality. And really the best thing to do there is to do it as early as possible. So, if I was to make a wish and rub a magic lamp, I would say that, when men get to the stage in life, let's say early 20s, where they're trying to understand their own biology and they're getting their first physical, for example, that, doctors and physicians are educated and aware enough about the importance of determining their level of fertility at that stage. That would probably be our genie magic lamp request.
That makes sense. Now, a question for you is, are you finding that it's more the men coming to you or the women? And I'm asking this because of that point the doctor made last year, which is men tend to not be as proactive. So I'm actually curious if it's where the demand is being driven, since you probably are assessing that as well.
Yeah, it's about 70-30. So 70% of kind of inquiries and communication that we have is to men, and around 30% are typically their partners that are engaging on behalf of them. That's what we've seen in our data. But to your point, family planning really remains a kind of female-driven and led topic and category. So for us, we've really tried to take our FAQ and take certain aspects of our website and cater them to a female audience and try to help them understand the male perspective through the female lens. And we work really hard of trying to improve that communication cycle all the time. But we certainly have a lot of women that engage with our service on behalf of their partner.
Okay. And thus, for those who are listening and wonder why for Fempower Health, meaning female, I'm interviewing about male fertility. And this is why, because I think I really do believe that people need the best information at hand. And because women, especially if those who are struggling with fertility, it's partly their partner potentially, but also they're often the ones making the decisions, and having awareness so that they can encourage their partners is also important. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's so kind. And I'd just like to say, for anyone who is, watching or listening, we've invested a lot of energy in trying to build up our capabilities around education. So, I'd invite anyone to go to dadikit.com, DADIKIT, and then just shoot us a note, send us an email, call us, send us a chat. We've really tried to, this quarter especially, beef up our ability to help those on the educational side. So we're here to help support, even in a situation where you're not trying to necessarily order a kit, or even if you don't necessarily have a male partner. If you want to learn more, we're always available. And again, we're really trying to normalize this conversation. So please reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks so much.